All right, I'm going to kick things off. Let's get started. Thanks everybody for joining me. I appreciate it. This is Always On VPN AMA. Ask me anything. Today is January 21, 2025, and I've got a handful of things that I want to kind of cover off, as well as getting to your questions. Obviously, answering your questions is the big part, but as I have a captive audience here, I'm going to share a bit of information with you as well. Today's agenda. I want to talk a little bit about an upcoming training class that I'm delivering that might be of interest to you. I'm going to talk a little bit about Windows 11 24H2, talk about Always On VPN DPC, some changes there. I also want to share with you a bit of information about certificates and Intune as it impacts Always On VPN. And then finally, kind of talk about known issues, challenges, limitations that we face, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page and that we're not, you don't feel like you're the only one in the world that has this weird problem, when in fact it's something that we're all struggling with. So, and then we'll wrap it up and we'll talk with everybody. We'll answer questions and we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. We have 2 hours scheduled, so I think we should be good on that. When we get to the Q&A session, you can put your questions in the Q&A or the chat. Or you can come off mute if you want to talk. Be happy to answer questions that way as well. Your call. I'll leave that up to you. I just have a couple of slides to go through, a bit of kind of housekeeping and so forth. I do have a newsletter. Many of you probably already subscribed because that's how you got the invitation to today's event. But if you've not already done so, I would encourage you to sign up, richardhicks.com/newsletter. I promise not to spam you too much, but I send out periodic like article updates, any news and information, training events where I might be attending. For example, if I'm going to be at, like last year, I was at Ignite or I was at Workplace Ninjas in Switzerland, those types of things, I'll let you know where I'm at. So hopefully we can connect, and that way you'll kind of be abreast of what I'm doing and where I am at. Also, if you're not already familiar, I am the author of Implementing Always On VPN. This is a book that I wrote a couple of years ago now, available on on Apress Media, and also I have lots of training, video training courses on Pluralsight. The video training course on Pluralsight for Always On VPN clocked in at around 7 hours. So most of the courses at Pluralsight are in the 2 to 3 hour range. My Always On VPN course is 7 hours. If you want to know how to deploy Always On VPN, that is probably the most comprehensive video training course certainly I have ever produced. It's the most comprehensive, certainly for this particular workload as well. So I would encourage you to check that out. You can go to aovpnbook.com to learn more about the book, or you can just go to richardhicks.com/pluralsight. That'll take you over to the Pluralsight course or the Pluralsight website, and you can see a list of my courses there, including the Always On VPN course. Now, I want to make everybody aware that I do have another training opportunity coming up. This is a virtual event, so it's a live online virtual event presented on the Via Monstra Online Academy. This is a 3-day live training event. We're going to cover all aspects of Intune and certificates, everything to do with delivering, issuing, and managing certificates using Microsoft Intune. So we're going to cover things like PKCS and SCEP and NDES, and we're also going to cover Cloud PKI. We're going to go with the whole thing. Anything to do with cloud, certificates in Intune, we are going to cover in great detail. I'm going to share tons of security best practices with you, do lots of live demonstration, and I have some sample files and scripts that I think will make your life infinitely easier for deploying things like workloads like NDES, the Network Device Enrollment Service, which is a prerequisite or requirement for deploying certificates with SCEP. If you'd like to learn more about that class, or you would like to register for it, because it's next week, by the way, it starts next Tuesday. There's still space available. You can still sign up. There's a few spots left. You can go to richardhicks.com/masterclass, and you can, again, learn more or sign up and register. If you sign up, that's awesome. I'd love to see you there. You will not be disappointed, I guarantee you. If you've ever deployed, specifically for NDES and SCEP, if you're deploying certificates with SCEP and you've deployed NDES to support that, I can almost assure you that it is suboptimal at a minimum. Um, I have gone through just about every guide on the internet that there is for deploying NDES to support SCEP and Intune, and not a single one of them has been complete or comprehensive. Every single guide that I have read is missing critical information. I'll share that with you in the class. Also, a lot of guides include information that is just either in wrong or insecure. There's a lot of recommended settings that are actually insecure. Reduce your security for NDES and SCEP. So if you already have it deployed and you're thinking, oh, I don't need the class because I'm good, you still might want to sign up and register, because you might find that you probably need to redo your NDES SCEP deployment, or at a minimum make some changes to improve security. That being said, let's get along to the business of Always On VPN. And I want to talk a little bit about Windows 11 24H2, because that just came out end of last year. And the cool thing about Windows 11 24H2 is that it now includes some new capability for us Always On VPN admins. Specifically, there were some changes to CSP, the configurations service provider in Intune, that allows us or exposes some new settings that are important to us. For example, you can now change the network outage time in your XML configuration file. You can set the interface metrics. IPv4 and IPv6 interface metrics settings are available. Use RAS credentials. We can enable or disable that in Intune now. We can define our encryption settings. We can define our Windows firewall profile. We can actually change that to the private network profile if we so choose. We could even, if you wanted to, disable IPv2 fragmentation. So don't recommend that, because it's a really good tool, but there's some corner cases in which you might need to do that. And so that is available to us. Now, here's the limitation, is that all of these settings are available in the CSP. They are not available in the Intune device configuration template. So if you go into Intune, there's no checkboxes or anything for any of these settings. So if you're deploying your Always On VPN configuration settings using XML, so you're either using PowerShell and then something like SCCM or Manage Engine, or whatever you're using to deploy software, then great, you can update your XML configuration file to include these settings, and they will take effect on Windows 11 24H2. The same XML profile can be used for non-24H2 machines. Windows will just ignore those settings. So you could update your XML, and then when you get to 24H2, then Windows will take advantage of those settings. So network outage time is really helpful if you have our RAS servers deployed behind a load balancer. I have had to lower that outage time or sometimes disable it to improve connectivity issues there, to resolve connectivity issues with IPv2 connections. The IPv4 and IPv6 interface metrics are important because sometimes that can cause problems for name resolution. And today, by the way, all of these settings today, we usually address them using PowerShell scripts. I have Intune remediation scripts available for all of these settings, except for private network and disable IPv2 fragmentation. But the other ones, network outage time, interface metrics, use RAS credential, and all those things, I have Intune remediation scripts. So if you're doing this post or pre-24H2, we had to do this with remediation scripts. The challenge with that is that when I deploy the profile, I have to make those changes to, again, network outage time, use RAS credentials, and things like that, post-deployment. That also means that once it deploys, it may not work correctly until the remediation applies. So that's a real problem. The fact that we can do this now natively with the Intune profile, or with the XML configuration file, I should say, means that I can deploy a setting with the VPN profile, and it will be fully functional out of the box. I did want to ask you, Philip, I'm going to put you on the spot here. The setting for private network, I did some testing on that, expecting that it would set the Windows firewall to the private profile. I wasn't able to get that to work. Did you have any luck in looking at that, Philip?
Same experience here. I'll need to follow
Okay.
up with some people. But yeah,
Okay.
I
Yeah.
I wonder what's the scenario for that in real
I
life,
don't
right?
know.
Because normally you would have a domain profile anyway once you, well,
Well,
if the machine is domain joined, right? So
that correct. Yeah. It maybe I'm thinking maybe it's for native intra-join devices.
probably.
So where you have a native intra-join device and you don't want it to have a domain profile, you still want it to have, but you don't want it to have the public profile or something. I don't know. I thought it was unusual, but quite clearly it's there, right?
Yeah, but even on
And
an Entra ID joined machine, you might want to have the domain profile so that TND and all of this fun is working, right?
agreed.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. If you can find out what the impetus was for that setting, because that's the only thing I can think of.
I'm trying to actually track down the person who implemented it because the one who checked it in is no longer in this team. So
Ah,
yeah, stay tuned.
well, okay, good deal. Let me know. I would be really interested to know what that's for.
Yeah,
It's
same.
there.
Yeah.
It's there. It doesn't seem to do anything,
Uh,
but that's kind of
uh,
what I got out of it. Maybe I'm totally misunderstanding that. So anyway, and then the disable IPv2 fragmentation, Philip, you mentioned that was for a kind of a corner case with some Cisco equipment, I think.
you mentioned the C word. Yeah. Yeah. Nothing more to add. Yeah.
Mhm. Very good, very good. Anyway, so there may be some weird problems that crop up that setting could help you on. So, shifting gears a bit, I do want to talk about Always On VPN DPC. If you're not familiar with DPC, that is the Dynamic Profile Configurator. This was a software solution developed initially by a company called Power On Platforms Limited. They were in the United Kingdom. They were based in the UK. Fantastic solution for being able to manage always on VPN client configuration settings using Active Directory and group policy. You could also extend that to use with Intune. So you could deploy the software agent with Intune. You could deploy the policies by importing your XML files into Intune. So it actually extends to Intune as well. Has some significant advantages over just using regular XML because we have a lot of advanced capabilities built into the product. You don't have to worry about creating XML files. You can actually just go through the group policy wizard like you do with any other group policy object, set the settings, and everything's good to go. I'm sure many of you on this call probably heard me sing the praises of DPC over the years. It's a fantastic solution. Sadly, Power On Platforms went out of business end of last year. And so the fate of DPC was kind of up in the air a bit. However, thankfully, the folks at Power On Platforms allowed its creator, Leo Darcy, who's on our call today, to keep the source code and offer that via open source. So today, thanks to Leo's great efforts, AOVPN DPC version 5 is available free of charge, and it's out in GitHub, and it's available via open source license. So now everyone can take advantage of this. Would strongly recommend that you do that because DPC is fantastic. It makes our lives a lot easier, solves lots of problems. All of the things that we talked about in that last slide, where you're setting all the IPv4 interface metric settings and use RAS credentials and all blah, 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 all of that. All of those are exposed as menu items in the group policy. And so you can literally just check the box that says, I want to set my interface and I want to set the interface metric to 5 or 3 or 20 or whatever I decide I want to do. And then the policy engine, or basically the policy engine that's a part of the DPC agent, will pick that up from group policy once it syncs and implement the XML for you on your behalf and then monitor that. So as you make changes, this is the beauty. Not only does it streamline deploying, but it also makes changing settings infinitely easier because I just change a setting in the group policy and then I just wait for group policy to refresh and all of my clients will get the new setting, build a new profile, and you're off to the races. And so, and again, we have first of all, there's a lot of advanced features and capabilities built into it. It eliminates entirely the need to use Intune remediations. That's fantastic. It also avoids this issue with Intune sync on Windows 11. I think we'll talk about that a little bit later, where that issue still persists. So we eliminate that. It's fantastic as far as that goes. It's just a light piece of software that has to be installed on all your endpoints. And again, now it's free. By the way, if you had the commercial version of DPC, I did write a blog post recently about how to migrate that to open source. It's a little bit of a dance you have to do to get your clients over to open source. I've helped a number of customers get there already. It's actually fairly straightforward, but you just have to do things in a certain specific order. And once you do that, it works fantastic. And so all's good there. If you have a DPC commercial license today, it will work into perpetuity. So you don't have to worry about that dying. But obviously, nobody's developing the commercial software any longer. So if you want to take advantage of updates, then you need to get to the open source version. And the beauty about it being open source is a couple of things. First, you got an issue, you just post it, and we'll have a look at it and see if we can't implement it. We're looking for bug reports, we're looking for feature enhancements, we're looking for anything like that. If you have suggestions, great. If you're a developer, you can participate, right? So if you think if there's something you want to look at, we'd love to have you take a look at the code and then check in your updates and things like that. So Leo, do you have anything to add to Always On VPN DPC open source?
I mean, have you considered being a salesperson?
You know,
couldn't have sold it better yourself.
I have tried to sell DPC for many years because it makes my life so easy, right? So it's like I'm trying to sell it, but at the end of ultimately, I'm selling it for me because it just makes my life so much easier, right? There's so many things that I don't have to deal with if I can get a customer to go that way. And any customer in the past would just be, well, we don't want to spend any money. It's like, oh, dang, I got to do it the hard way, right? Now there's no excuse. I just need to make sure that they support open source software. And at this point, if they do, I'm like, fantastic, we're using it. Let's go. So it's awesome. Yeah. But I appreciate your effort. The community appreciates your effort. And I'm glad I'm able to do it some justice by talking about it.
Yeah, and if people do feel like they want to have just a minor plug here, if people do still want that security and safety net of having a kind of commercial support contract, we are still offering those as well.
Yes, we have a support team of 2 people. One in the UK, one in the US. I'll give you 2 guesses as to who those people are. But yeah, we're happy to. We do have a commercial support offering. So if you do have, and great point, Leo, is that there are organizations out there that will certainly look at adopting open source, but they do want formal support contracts. We can support that as well for a small fee.
Yeah. And also the best place to kind of hang out and chat with us and things is on the Discord as well.
Yes.
So there's a new Discord. One of the advantages of going open source is that I'm not hidden behind a company anymore. We can be much more open and honest. And sometimes you'll see me scratching my head going, why is that happening? But also it's really nice to be able to engage with people and kind of not have to worry about taking off the hood and showing people the engine of it all as appropriate. And again, just back to Richard's point around developers and getting involved, 100%. I would absolutely love to work with others to extend it for the tool to be the best it can be.
You bet. I would say always great to have another set of eyes, right? And especially from the security perspective, the more people we have look at the source code, if there's something that we've overlooked from a security perspective, we'd love to know about it. So
I'll just drop the link to the new repo in the chat. And again, it doesn't even have to be kind of source code level. If there's documentation wrong or missing, or you feel you could contribute to that, it doesn't have to be all super geeky, multi-threaded code stuff. It can be as simple as, here's a better migration document or something along those lines.
Excellent point. You're right. Absolutely. Documentation is always really, really helpful. So yeah, if there's something that could be improved there, we'd love to have you participate for sure. Yeah, thanks for sharing that link, man. Appreciate it. Awesome. Moving on, I want to talk a little bit about Philip's favorite topic, right, Philip? Certificates. No, Philip's going to go on mute for a while. He's checking out now. But anyway, certificates and
Ooh,
specifically.
no. Oh God, yeah, that's your part clearly. Yeah.
I know. I have fun with certificates, but yeah, I get why people don't, right?
Yeah, me too, but probably in another way. Anyway, no, sorry.
Absolutely, I hear you there. So I wanted to bring up the topic of strong certificate mapping. This is something that hopefully all of our Always On VPN administrators are aware of today, and there's some important milestones coming up. So this is why I wanted to bring this kind of top of mind for everyone. So strong certificate mapping is coming in February of 2025. Now, the little bit of background on this. Microsoft in May of 2022 introduced KB 501 4754, and this changed the functionality of domain controllers and KDCs, or KDCs, excuse me, and issuing CAs. So domain controllers and issuing CAs, specifically online Active Directory integrated enterprise CA. So if you have ADCS deployed on premises and you're issuing CAs via Active Directory, then there were some changes with the May 2022 update that were designed to implement, well, it's designed to implement strong certificate mapping. And the idea here is that it was to mitigate what Microsoft was seeing was some impersonation abuse in the wild with some of these certificates. So they wanted to more strongly map the certificate to a principal or identity. This applies to user certificates and device certificates. And essentially what happens is that the principal enrolling for the certificate, when after these changes are in place on the issuing CA, essentially the issuing CA now embeds the SID for the requesting principal on the certificate. And now with the change on the KDC, when a certificate is presented to a KDC for authentication, if the certificate, if the SID doesn't match the principal, then you as an administrator have the ability to either log that event or block the authentication event today. Now, when Microsoft first introduced this update, it applied only to what's known as online templates. In Active Directory Certificate Services vernacular, an online template is any template in which the subject is built from Active Directory, meaning when I request the certificate, I don't tell it the principal that I want. It knows the principal that I am because I'm the requester, whether that's a user or whether that's a device. The challenge is that initially those updates did not apply to offline templates. And the challenge with that is that offline templates are used by Intune, specifically for PKCS and SCEP. And so there was this huge gap. Microsoft wants to move to a full enforcement mode. And by the way, that's coming in February of 2025 because late last year, Microsoft introduced support for strong certificate mapping for PKCS and SCEP. So any certificates issued with Intune now have the capability of embedding the SID. Now, I say that carefully because it doesn't do it by default. So if you are issuing certificates with Intune using SCEP or using PKCS, you have to take some steps to basically enforce or to get the SID embedded in those certificates. For PKCS, you have to make sure that your certificate connector is updated to the latest version. You also have to set a registry key there. And then for SCEP, you actually have to put a different variable. It's called on-premises security identifier, and you do that on the template. So again, the idea here is this is enhanced security to prevent kind of spoofing attacks. And these changes were introduced in October of 2024. Now, here's the deal. Microsoft gives us the permission or the ability to disable this functionality today. So today it's set in audit mode only. So when this certificate, or excuse me, when this change, these updates are in place, it's just logging event logs. So if I present a certificate that doesn't have this information, then it just logs an event on the domain controller. In February of 2025, they're switching to full enforcement, meaning if you don't do anything at all, authentication may break after you install the February 2025 updates on your domain controllers. Microsoft is giving us the ability with a registry setting to basically disable this even with the February 2025 update, but they've said in September of 2025, that's it. No more. No, it will ignore the registry key. So before the end of before the September security update, you've got to make sure that your infrastructure, if you're deploying certificates with Intune via PKCS or SCEP, you have to have made those changes to support that. Now, with SCEP, again, as I'd mentioned before, with SCEP, we need to add the SAN URI, on-premises security identifier. I'm going to actually show you that just real quick here. Let me jump over to Intune. Where's Intune? Let me sign in. Bear with me 1 second. I just want to show you this. And am I not sharing that screen? I'm not. Am I? No, it's on my camera. Can everybody see my screen? It says, oh, I'm sharing. Okay, great. Let's see here. And we need devices. I'm going to go to, we're talking about SCEP right now, right? Okay, so configuration, and we wait because Intune's slow sometimes. There we go. I'm going to go to my SCEP profile here. And what you will see is if I go to my settings, got to look around my microphone here. There we go. I'm going to edit settings. You'll see that I have added an attribute in the subject alternative name field. So this is all you have to do. If you're using SCEP, no other changes are required. You just simply need to add an attribute called URI. And the variable that you use here is on-premises security identifiers, just like that. If you mistype this, it will be wrong. So it will complain at you until you get this right. So if if there's a typo there, it won't work. So if you get it spelled correctly with the brackets and everything, it'll give you the green check. And it's just on-premises security identifier. Once you do that, this certificate template will now start embedding that property into the certificates. Now, let me jump back here. Where are we at? Yep. Okay, great. So once all of your endpoints have received the updated certificate, then you can switch to enforcement mode if you want, or you'll be prepared for the February 2025 updates. If you're not ready to do this, there's a registry setting. I documented it on a blog post on my website. So if you check my website, look for the last couple of articles, I forget when I wrote about it, maybe even just recently, where I talk about the registry key that you can set so that when the February 2025 updates come out, it won't switch to full enforcement. But if you don't have that key, it's going to try to enforce that setting. And if you don't have certificates issued correctly, then things break. Now, for PKCS, it's a little different. You do have to update the certificate connector. You have to make sure you're running this version or later. And you need to add a registry setting on the connector server. Here is that setting. I've documented this on my website. If you just go to my website and search for strong certificate mapping, you'll find this. You need to enable this setting on the connector server and then reboot. Can't just restart services. You got to reboot. And that's all you have to do. You don't have to touch the template. You just have to enable this setting. And once you enable this setting on the server, then subsequent certificates being issued with PKCS will now have the embedded SID. Now, unfortunately, if you've already issued certificates that don't have the SID, well, how is it that you get them to update? With either SCEP or PKCS, it doesn't really matter. You actually need to create a new policy for them. And so essentially what you have to do is just create a new policy and then remove the old one, and then Intune will kind of take care of itself. I'm trying to do some investigation right now. I've actually had a bit of success with this, so I'll probably document it later, look for some more information on my website, where if I just change a setting on the existing profile, then it actually reissues that. I've had mixed results with that. So kind of stay tuned for more information on that. I'm hoping that we can find a good workaround for that so that we don't have to basically reissue or do the dance where we have to remove a policy and recreate a new policy. It kind of sucks, but it is what it is. Finally, I want to wrap things up here quickly with known issues. We still have our Windows 11 and Intune connection drops. If you're if you're deploying Always On VPN client configuration settings using Intune, and you're using the custom XML option, not the default VPN template, but the custom template, and you're supplying your own XML, you may find that in Windows 11 and later, your customers or your clients are complaining about connectivity issues, and specifically connection drops. Those connection drops are associated with device syncs. Essentially what happens is with Windows 11 using custom XML, it's possible that the VPN profiles are being removed and replaced on each device sync, and each device sync regardless if there was a change. And so the way to troubleshoot this is go to the PowerShell or command, or actually PowerShell, run the command get-vpn connection and note the GUID, because each VPN profile has a GUID. Note the GUIDs for the tunnels, user tunnel, device tunnel, or both. Issue a device sync and then run that command again. And if the GUID changes, then you know the profile was actually removed and replaced. And so that will give you an idea if you're running into this issue. This was a problem initially with Windows 11. It was fixed for the native Intune VPN template in August of 2023, but it is still broken today for Windows 11 if you're using custom XML. There is a workaround for it. It's kind of touchy, but the workaround is basically to order your XML configuration file precisely and exactly as Windows Intune expects it to be. So fundamentally what's happening here is you can put some of the elements in XML out of order. As long as they're nested correctly, it will work. But Intune, when it evaluates the profile, will look at the order and then say, oh, if it's not in the right order, there must be a change. And then it detects that again as a change, and then it removes the profile and redeploys it. And it will do that on every device sync. And the challenge there is, of course, if you have customers or clients working and they're working at the time and all of a sudden, boom, the VPN drops, and it'll reconnect because it just deploys a new profile and connects automatically. But it can be pretty disruptive. I wrote about it in this blog post. And I'm in that blog post, I give you a couple of tips for determining what that specific order is. If you're having issues with that, take a look on my GitHub. If you go to github.com/RichardHicks/AOVPN, I have a couple of example files there, and I have made a great care to make sure that those example files are ordered in the way Intune expects them. Also, there's a couple of tools that I have for you available, some PowerShell tools that allow you to basically look at the XML configuration that Intune is putting down, and then you can reorder your XML file to match that. You have to match the syntax to the letter, to the actual dots, right? So, so anyway, so be mindful of that you're still having some issues there. I want to talk a little bit about an issue that I came up with recently that I encountered, and Damian, you'll have firsthand experience with this. I think I've come up with a really weird challenge with Intune Cloud PKI, specifically for VPN and Wi-Fi when you're authenticating with NPS. If you're doing any sort of user and device authentication with NPS, what I encountered was that there is the issuing CA certificate, the Cloud PKI issuing CA. So when you deploy a Cloud PKI, you have to deploy two tiers. So you have a root CA, an issuing CA, you issue from the issuing CA. The issuing CA is missing CDP information. So the CDP is a CRL distribution point. It's missing that information. And so what happens is that calls, when NPS tries to validate the certificate chain, so the leaf certificate or the end entity certificate is valid. It can validate that because the CRL is published there. But when it goes to look at the issuing CA or the intermediate CA certificate, it doesn't have CDP information, so it fails. It says, I can't check to see if this issuing CA certificate is valid, and so it fails. So the workaround that we have to implement is the same one that we use actually for intra ID conditional access. And it's basically we have to enable the ignore no revocation check in the registry. There's a setting in the registry on the NPS server that you have to set. So I would love to know, please hit me up in the chat or the Q&A if anybody else has deployed Cloud PKI for Intune, if they've encountered this issue, one. Two, if you have it, can you check your issuing CA certificate and see if you have CDP information? I had a customer bring this to my attention. We noticed it. I built a new Cloud PKI for Intune in my test environment, and I noticed the issue. I swear when Intune for Cloud PKI came out initially, I did this testing and I thought it worked, or I'm pretty sure everything worked, but it's possible that I missed that. So what I want to know is, first of all, the issuing CA certificate should absolutely have CDP information in it. This is a misissuance in my estimation. I don't have a client, or I don't have a support case open with Microsoft, but I plan to open one soon. But I would love to know if anyone else is seeing this issue. So please let me know if you're on the call and you have Cloud PKI deployed. Can you do me a favor right now? Look at your issuing CA certificate in Intune and tell me, for the Cloud PKI, tell me if it has CDP information on the intermediate or the issuing CA certificate. But if you encounter this problem, it's a registry setting. If you just do a search on my website for ignore no revocation check, you'll find the registry setting there. Or if you have something else, just drop me you can't find it, just drop me a note. I'll be happy to share that with you. That being said, I'm done with my part of this conversation. We're going to open up to Q&A, but before we do that, I do want to kind of open it up. Philip, if you said you might have some things to share with us. I'm always interested to get your take on what's going on the inside. Anything fun or interesting that you can share with us today?
Yeah, so the topic is exclusion routes. So picture a scenario, you have regular Windows, whatever, 10, 11, doesn't matter device, and you define exclusion routes in the profile through XML, Intune, doesn't matter.
Okay.
So suppose you define an exclusion route for IPv4 and one for IPv6, right?
Okay.
You might see that when you connect a profile, the RAS client service is crashing. And that's because if you define a v6 or a v4 route, but the device does not have a v4 or respectively a v6 gateway, we're actually crashing because we're expecting it to be there.
Okay.
So that's
probably
apparently, was probably missed in testing, right? Because we
no question
just assumed it's there, yeah. So, but it's not.
And I'm going to bet money that everybody's got IPv4, right? So this is probably a scenario when you introduce an IPv6 exclusion route.
Exactly.
And you don't have a gateway, which is common, right? So most customers are deploying RAS and not using IPv6 for client to gateway communication, but the internet is using IPv6, right? So if you're going to a public website, there's a good chance it has IPv6. So DNS will give you that back, and if it looks at that route and says, "Oh, great, this route is excluded," but I totally can see where that would break. Yeah, interesting. Well, that's good to know. We'll keep our eyes open for that.
Yeah, there's actually trying to get this fixed, and we seem to have good chances because it's a crash. So if anyone from the audience is seeing this, please ping me. The more customers we can gather, the more certain people will listen. So
yeah, and exclusion routes are only available in custom XML. I don't think they're in the Intune native profile, unfortunately. So
no, but that's one of the things. Yeah.
Yep. So okay, good to know. Good to know. Okay, we'll keep, and that's any version of Windows 10 or 11?
Since ever exclusion routes are in Windows, this problem is there. But interestingly, so far, only 2 customers hit it. Well, the 2 we know of.
Yeah. Well, again, I think that speaks to the adoption of IPv6 on the enterprise, right?
Maybe.
Interesting. Well, I don't use, so I have IPv6 deployed in my lab. Leo can attest to that. And I've not run into this issue, but I don't use exclusion routes. So I might do some testing on that, see if I can replicate.
Yeah, so I think the scenario was a customer, apparently in Europe, something called DS Lite is pretty common for some providers, dual stack Lite, and that's quite nightmarish for IPv2.
Yeah.
So what their thought is, and it's a good thought, so they're saying we don't want to use v6 inside the network or inside the VPN tunnel, but we're just making our VPN server available on native v6 and on IPv4, right? So we can avoid this dual stack Lite problem, right?
At least
and
for
that's
the tunnel,
when
right?
they hit it, And that's when
so
they did
tunnel establishment. If tunnel establishments on IPv6, you don't have to necessarily route IPv6 inside the tunnel, but the tunnel is established with IPv6. Yeah, you're right. So the client has an IPv6, and you want to make sure that native traffic goes over the internet, not through the tunnel. Then I could see where that would happen. Yeah, and yes, I have a few customers complaining about IPv6 related connectivity in mostly in European countries, and I think we were working together with someone who had a kind of a strange problem with that recently. But yeah, definitely known issue there for sure.
I find that many cable providers do that. So they use some DS Lite-ish implementation, and for some it works okay, for some less okay.
Yeah.
So, and that's how they ended up there. And these two particular customers, they're government-ish, so they have to use forced tunneling. So that's why they needed the exclusion routes, and that's how they hit it. Yeah.
I see. That makes sense. And by the way, just for the everybody on the call, DS Lite is an IPv6 basically translation technology. So many service providers, and most commonly mobile carriers, but increasingly regular ISPs are doing this as well. Their networks are actually IPv6 only, and they run IPv4 as a service over an IPv6 network. So there's basically an IPv6 underlay with an IPv4 overlay. And so technologies like DS Lite, 464 XLAT, there's a couple of other technologies out there where that's how they're getting IPv4 traffic over their native IPv6 networks. And so if you're using IPv6 natively, you don't have to worry about it. But if you try to hit an IPv4 resource, then it has to figure out some way to get that over my IPv6 network. So again, DS Lite, 464 XLAT, there's a couple others out there that can be problematic, and they cause problems for some VPN transports, mostly for IPv2 due to some of its complexities. But ultimately, we've seen some challenges and issues there where, as a workaround, you end up either having to disable IPv6 or do some other things to try and work around those things.
Yeah, and I see it greatly depends on the ISP. So for some, it works quite well. For some, it doesn't work so well. And others offer the option to either disable DS Lite from their customer portal, or you might need to open a ticket. I had one specific customer, they had to, for most of their users, over 600, they had to open individual tickets to disable it. There was like some poor person had to do that. So, So the experience might depend a bit on the ISP, but yeah. And Richard, you should probably at some point talk about your IPv6 experience with one specific government customer. I'm not sure how much you can share there, but
yes,
maybe not now, but yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So I am involved in an IPv6 project for a couple of U.S. federal organizations. So yeah. Learning some interesting things about IPv6 at massive scale in these environments. And the U.S. federal government has a mandate to be IPv6 only. And those are directives from OMB, Office of Management and Budget. And so, so there's a lot of work going on in the federal government space to do that. So it's been interesting for sure. And by the way, that's where I've kind of cut my teeth on things like 464 XLAT, because before that I had no idea what it was. And it was like, and then you don't think about things like that, right? So dual stack IPv4 and IPv6 is kind of is really a transition technology. The ultimate goal is to get to IPv6 only, because why have two transports? There's no need for it. But in the interim, you can't run IPv6 only because the rest of the world may not have IPv6. And so you may need to access IPv4 resources from a host that doesn't have an IPv4 address, right? So how does that work, right? So I do a DNS lookup and I get 2 IPv4 addresses back, and I don't have an IPv4 address. I won't be able to get there without some sort of transition technology, and that's where things like 464XLAT come in. And of course, the company that I'm working with, I'm basically a subcontractor for another company working for these federal agencies. And we've actually done quite a bit of work with Windows, because Windows 11 certainly didn't support things like 464XLAT on interfaces like Wi-Fi and Ethernet. They supported it on like a WWAN interface, like an LTE interface, because a lot of mobile carriers require that. But that functionality wasn't built into Windows 11 at that level. So we're actually working with Microsoft to get that implemented. So when it comes to when you see that eventually, it'll come in the future. It'll be supported in Windows at some point in the future. But there is work going on for that, and I've done a lot of testing with private code from Microsoft on that to get it to work. So it's been interesting. It's been fun. It's been certainly an interesting experience for sure.
Yeah, there's quite an initiative for GE, which is 24H2, CLAD, XLAD, DHCP options. There's a lot coming, and I think it's quite related to the customer you're working with, right? Because reasons. Yeah. So.
Yep, absolutely, yeah, because we're doing testings in native IPv6 lab, and things got to work, right? So, getting it in Windows is great, but how do you get it on a phone, for example? Devices that have firmware, right? And medical devices. There's a lot of challenges around that has been interesting for sure, no question.
Oh, and I think I hit with another customer. Android is still not supporting Slack. Right?
No, Android doesn't support DHCP v6.
Oh, DHCP v6. It's only supports Slack.
Yeah, Android is Slack only. So yeah, we're kind of going down an IPv6 rabbit hole here, but Slack is stateless automatic address configuration, and it's basically where a router advertises a prefix, and the client just makes it up its own IP address, and then DHCP v6 works fundamentally the way DHCP v4 works, right? Android clients don't support DHCP v6. They for whatever reason. So yeah,
and I think another challenge with that is it doesn't support RDNSS, so the DNS server over the router advertisement. So that's why you would need DHCP. It does now.
Yeah,
okay,
no, absolutely. You're absolutely right. Yeah, but I think it does now. I thought they they introduced support for that. I don't have any Android devices. I'm never close to that, but I think it does now. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that goes. Why in the world you would have a commercial operating system that does not support DHCP v6, I have no idea, but they seem to have decided to die on that hill. I don't know if that ever changes, but whatever. We'll have to see how it goes.
And that probably applies to other products as well, right? So yeah.
Right, yeah.
Anyway, but we could talk for hours about v6. Let's not do that.
No question. Awesome. So let's get on to the Q&A. I'm going to start with Leif's question here, which is... Leif, this is a pretty long question, but thanks for supporting. I appreciate you posting. Leif says, we are more or less running Zero Trust Network with the entire IT department running a guest network. Even at HQ, we have an issue reconnecting when going from conference rooms using Wi-Fi back to the desk, where it's cable network from time to time, always on, doesn't reconnect. Of course, reconnect automatically is checked. We have the same problem when I do a failover in NetScaler HA cluster. Since AO Always On VPN is in SSL bridge, all sessions need to reconnect. Always On VPN simply doesn't do that. DAA did this better. That's interesting. So to address that, my first question for you, Leif, is I'm assuming you are using IKE v2 because SSTP, since it's TCP based, is much more reliable in that scenario. With IKE v2, since it's UDP, when you move networks, the IKE mobility takes will try to reconnect and reestablish a session, and sometimes that doesn't work. Am I correct there, Leif?
Hi, Richard. I'm Leif. Yeah. Thanks. Thank you for taking your time. I will look into the IKV2. I'm pretty sure we have IKV2 enabled, of course.
That's what I thought.
It's a pretty new setup. And do we have anything more? Any other idea? Is it just me, or is it a well-known issue?
No, this is pretty common. What you're describing is pretty common, and it has to do with again the limitations of using IKV2 since it's UDP. Sometimes those connections don't reestablish as promptly as like TCP-based connections, because with TCP, obviously the connection is torn down when you move, and then you reestablish a new one. So TCP connections, or SSTP, is usually more reliable and more responsive in those scenarios. There are some things you can do. I don't know if you've made any changes to your network outage time. There are two settings. There's one setting on the server side and one setting on the client, and I think the default settings are like 30 minutes on the server side and the client side. You could try reducing those. I don't know that you'll ever get to a scenario where it is perfect, but you can make it better by reducing those times.
So on the server side, you said 30 minutes?
I think the default is 30 minutes, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm pretty sure
there's an idle
30 minutes.
It's both, I believe, yeah. But usually it's good enough to do it on the client side, because that's ultimately what's controlling the connection. So yeah, I would set it to a very low value, a few seconds, just for testing, and probably test with SSTP only if you see this as well. I guess not.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
I apologize for not doing my homework, but I do believe we have SSTP only as well.
Okay.
But I haven't checked before this meeting. I will do that. SSTP only. I'll do some notes here, and you said 30-minute timeout as default.
I think the default is 30 minutes. You can either disable it or just set it to a low value to see if that helps.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
Right. And like I mentioned. After that, it worked better with DA.
Yeah, that's all TCP based, right? IP.
Right.
Yes. But I'm not the only one, right?
No, not at all.
It's always a challenge, especially when switching networks.
It is.
Is there some load balancing involved, like a load balancer somewhere?
It is over Netscaler, and I think I wrote that. Yeah, when we do a failover the Netscaler due to firmware upgrade and so on, it is the same issue.
Yes. Yeah. Not surprising. Yeah, not surprising. Pretty well.
There is, Rich, there is a setting on the CAMs, right, which says if a certain endpoint is down, it will send a TCP reset. Well, that's only helping for TCP, obviously.
Right. Yes.
But
so
I had
some load balancers
great
do that by
success with
default.
that. Yeah.
Some load balancers do that by default. Others you have to set it, but it is TCP only. There is no reset option for UDP, and that's why I kept alluding to the fact that if it's using UDP, we can't make this perfect, but we can sometimes make it better.
Yeah. Is it using UDP? I think what we publish in the Netscaler is just the HTTPS, the TCP 443.
In that case,
so that'd be SSTP then.
Yeah. In that case, if you're just using SSTP and you're seeing long failover times, there might be a setting. The CAMP has this setting, and I forget where it is on the Netscaler or if it's set by default. But there's a setting that says issue a TCP reset on real server failure. Sometimes it doesn't do that. And some load balancers do it by default. I think F5 does it by default, but look for something like that. So if there's a real server failure, you want to issue a TCP reset to the client.
Right. I made a note. Thanks. Yeah. Great. All right. Yeah. So,
good deal.
So I'm not the only one, but
did I answer your questions about the update?
I think so. CS? Oh yeah, exactly. Oh yeah. Yeah, we're looking forward to that.
Good deal. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Richard.
If something comes up, let me know. Just you can reach out to me via email or whatever. And if you have any other questions, I can follow up on that for you.
Good to know. Thanks a lot.
Good deal. Let's get to Doug's questions. Curious to know overall how people are seeing things with Always On VPN and 24H2. Our experience so far has been tickets are fewer on 24H2. We're pushing that out company-wide now. So I've I've had good experience with 24H2 since deploying it. Leo, I don't know how much you're doing of that anymore, but Philip, are you aware of any issues?
I can't comment on the AOVPN specifically. The organization that I'm working with at the moment, they've had a bunch of issues relating to autopilot and new builds. Specifically, I believe it's around some of the drivers and 24H2, and some weirdness around that side of things. I've heard some rumblings and grumblings from places like Windows Weekly and the Register and things around things not completely being A-OK. But yeah, ultimately, and it sounds like there's been quite a bit of engineering going into the AOVPN and network stacks in 24H2. So
yeah,
that would kind of align why we're hopefully seeing some fewer tickets.
Very good. Yeah. Philip, any comments on that?
It's a newer kernel version, right? So that's why it's a full upgrade.
Yes.
We do see a bit of driver, as Leo mentioned, a bit of driver challenges and some third-party issues, or some software issues, which, well, I guess they should have bubbled up by now, but they're only showing now. So yeah, but in general, it looks fine to me. So yeah.
Good to know.
There is actually, it's not VPN related. There is, I'm not quite sure if that's public. There is apparently something in the December updates when you run a DHCP server and it's on somehow Hyper-V is involved. So if it's hosted on Hyper-V, the client might not get a valid DHCP acknowledgement and just sits there without an IP address.
Oh, interesting. And that's if you're using DHCP for VPN client IP address assigning?
I think for any VPN. For any VPN, for any DHCP. So it's not just directly related to but it could be for VPN too, right? If you do DHCP there, yeah. So and I think it's the common ground is if it runs on a Hyper-V host or out of a Hyper-V host.
I see. Interesting.
I believe it's either in the health release dashboard or it will go there quite soon, or it's in the KB. It's mentioned in KB. I believe it's known update coming for that. Just in case you see this, apparently there's a bit of volume. The support guys seeing quite a lot of cases there.
Got it. Good to know. Doug also asks, any improvements with Ike v2 and SSTP fallback? We had been testing this and found that it could get stuck and not fall back in a hotel or airport type scenarios. Leaving the user tunnel without leaving the user without a working Always On VPN. I recall I asked about this in a previous AMA. Philip said to avoid for this reason. My recommendation is to avoid IPv2 with SSTP fallback as well. Continuing, he says, I would still really like to have the opposite, SSTP with IPv2 fallback, as this would allow us to manage fewer profiles to support access in a country where we aren't allowed to use 443 against a foreign domain name. That's interesting. But I think failover detection is perhaps inadequate regardless. So let me make a couple of comments on that. So
it's interesting.
We definitely recommend using SSTP because it is very firewall friendly, right? And it just seems to be more reliable. IPv2 is a great protocol, don't get me wrong, but it just suffers from some operational limitations, mostly imposed by the networks, right? ISPs doing wonky things under the covers. Poor quality consumer grade home networking equipment causes problems for IPv2. Firewalls block IPv2 from time to time, right? So that's why it's tough. It's a tough protocol to use, but there's sometimes you absolutely have to have it because it does offer some advanced security features and benefits. That being said, SSTP can be very secure, right? So it's still an excellent protocol from a security perspective. So that's why we just say I tend to recommend personally use SSTP and call it a day. But you bring up a fantastic point, and one that I don't think I had ever considered is that you are in a foreign country that does not allow you to access a foreign domain on port 443, and in that case, you could use something like IPv2. So my initial thought, or my prevailing thought on this has always been, why would you need IPv2 fallback? Because SSTP is always going to work, but I'd never considered that scenario. So you have brought up the first, at least in my experience, um, use case for SSTP with IKV2 fallback. So that is interesting.
I appreciate it. Again, it's an edge case. I guess maybe Microsoft itself might face this. This is because we have offices in China and we're rolling out so we're not allowed to use. We can't terminate. We got a license to use like a Chinese registered domain name against 443 because we actually use Azure China to terminate this. I know that's not technically support, but it works fine. So all our AL VPNs terminate to Azure, and so we can use global load balancing to actually steer the China connections. But then when they see the Azure data center looks at the host name coming in on the request, and if it's not registered against the Chinese registry thing, then it just disrupts the connection. So we're going through how we architect this to work is we actually just have users currently use IKV2 in country. We have a separate profile. This is the only place we use IKV2. Everyone else, we just use SSTP for all the reasons you said. It just works. But we're how do we do a fallback, or where can we get it's just a very difficult problem to solve. What's optimal without exploding the number of profiles we have to manage, or people switching. It's hard to train users to have to switch. We're trying to have hey, the same profile works everywhere, but what we found is it actually doesn't, because you can't terminate it in China. So to tell them to use this other one, and then we named it okay, this one doesn't work either. Well, it's because it's blocked where you are. The IKE doesn't work. So sorry, China, we have no solution.
So let me ask you this, though. China allows you to use IKV2 outbound?
IKE is fine within country. Of course, leaving China is a problem, right? That's heavily filtered.
That's what I would expect.
They'll block those. But in country, we use IKV2s to connect all our factories and everything there. It works totally fine in country. I see. And the problem with SSTP is ISPs block 443 and 80 on every internet connection you get, and even in Azure's data center in China, which we have a subscription to, they still disrupt it unless you have a registration for that domain, and they can only get registrations for domains that are Chinese registered domains, not our foreign one. So this is the fun.
Fascinating. Yeah.
This is no easy answer. And this is the kind of place where these new solutions like Entra, ID, SASE stuff don't work either, right? That's not a solution. This is where AL VPN is a great fit, because we at least have all the controls.
Yeah, I get it.
So going to your other point around SSTP first, I believe that you just need to set the setting to 6, where it'll kind of go SSTP first and fail back to IKV2. I can't comment as to how well it fails back, but that is the option. The other thing that might help you in this scenario is, again, to kind of talk about DPC, because DPC is a group policy based solution. Or I should say, a registry-based solution. What you could do is layer your profile. So if all of the other config is the same, you could put all of that in a single profile, and then you could have a group for your Chinese users or whatever country you like, and have that just set the VPN config, and have that profile overwrite or take precedence over the other one. And then once it gets down onto the device, all of your registry settings are the way that they want for that specific device, for that specific user. And then it will just generate the profile at that point, giving it all the same profile name, etc.
Yeah. This is we did a little bit of testing with DPC, and I mean, we could steer different custom XMLs based on groups too. So it's just there's no it's hard, be nice to have an easier answer. I just don't think there is one.
So you would prefer to have a single profile which works essentially everywhere?
Yeah, the one we publish for all our global users is Always On VPN user or whatever, right? And that's the one effectively everyone uses, except that that's SSTP only. And we even if we could have, here's actually is if there could be 2 different names specified on it. If you could have 2 different host names, even, is something we're that would be helpful. If you could have try this name, then this name, then we could have the global name and a name that we know resolves for, again, probably subject that combined with an Azure load balancing setup could work perhaps, because you'd get the local name first, probably based on the routing there. So those are things we've been playing with, like what would be the best solution. Like we could even actually terminate the China one to an IP address and it'll get through, because they don't do a name check then. And we have the like, so it's just like imperfect.
Yeah. Terminating against an IP address poses its own challenges, because then subject name on the certificate has to be the IP, and that could change.
Correct. And we use internal PKI against the RAS host names for that reason. So we can actually do that if we want, right? Like that's an advantage to doing internal PKI against the gateway, like the RAS gateways. Public CAs wouldn't be a solution.
Private IP addresses on their certificates, but if you're doing your own, you're right. Yeah.
Correct. That's a big one reason we've adhered to that. Is like we know in the autopilot provisioning we can lay down our root CA, and then it's got immediate trust of our internal PKI. So but
interesting. Yeah.
Rich, your audio changed. I think maybe your microphone switched, or is it just me?
No, I heard the same. Yeah.
Okay.
No, I don't. That's weird.
It looks like your laptop mic is on or something like that.
Really? That's strange. I didn't get any notifications here. That's unusual.
Yeah, true. The sound is worse now. Not bad, but not the same microphone.
Sounds like you're quite far away from the mic.
Oh, that's unusual. Hang on a second.
Yeah, better.
Can I ask one other question? I think I didn't put in the chat. Well,
sure.
So we're just working through niche. This is actually one of the reasons we're pushing to 24H2 really hard. Is we were doing a bunch of analysis against, like we've been collecting all the logs against like a global load balance. We got, including China, 4 endpoints that do ALVPN across the globe, and we were doing traffic analysis and like log analysis, and there was like a subset of clients that connect like between, let's say, like 30 and 300 times a day. So their connections were like very sporadic. They were dropping very frequently. And we identified that they were all on 23H2. Like we'd been slowly rolling out 24H2 opt-in, and none of them were on that. So we don't know for sure that that's causational, but something was unhappy with these clients. And these people just weren't opening tickets because they probably weren't using a lot of resources that demanded ALVPN, but it's just sitting there. Like they weren't using, we've moved a lot to internet facing, of course. So we've actually been pushing, our consultant like pushed a script to like hard delete the profile, like purge it, and then to force MDM to reload it. And we're seeing that that's reduced that. And now we're making this push to 24H2 as well, because there was no indication in a 24H2 client. So I'm just curious if that's been seen before. Like it was crazy to look at the logs, and most people connect, 2 to 6 times a day, depending on how often they go to meetings and their laptop goes to sleep. And then you have these people that are connecting 30, 300 times a day. Like they're just slamming the all the time. And we weren't getting complaints from most of them. So we don't know that it was that they cared, but the logs alone were overwhelming.
I heard for 24H2, there was some initiative to improve the whole power management. So that could be related, because I saw, well, that's guessing to be fair.
Yeah.
I saw issues where, power management is nowadays so complicated, right? Because there is this always on, always connected, or connected standby, whatever the name of the day is. And then depending on how device vendor implemented it or not implemented it, it might behave different. So I think there was a lot of work done there under some reliability umbrella, and that might contribute to it. Plus, it's a newer kernel version, right? We're skipping 3 kernel versions, going from 20 something H2 to 24 H2. So yeah, there were literally hundreds of changes. So potentially something like that.
That makes sense. That could have been another brother, because that was one of the things, actually, again, I wasn't top line for me, but my team was saying, was like, oh, this probably is impacting their battery life, even if it's not impacting them other ways. Like maybe they're not noticing, but like that 300 connections a day is a lot of battery happening versus 1 or 6.
Yeah, and And for another customer, it was interesting. It was SSTP connections only, because they applied some setting for affecting any TCP connections, lowering the SYN retransmit time. So if you initiate a TCP connection, send a SYN, SYNEC, and all that, and there is a timeout as to when the TCP algorithm says, oh, I didn't get a response, I'm tearing down these connections. And because they were in such a bad connection, and I believe they were in the China-ish region, and because they had limited that, the GCP connection would just drop, and SSTP would say, okay, I'm disconnecting, reconnecting. And I think they set this back to default, and it got better, and at some point they even set it to a higher value. I can send you some break key there, so
I wouldn't mind seeing that. I don't think we would have modified it, but it's something I should watch. If a higher value has some benefit, we'd watch for.
Yeah, because that well, keep in mind it affects anything TCP on the
machine. Yeah.
Right?
It's wide-reaching.
So it's a bit of a But they had the scenario for a few hundred machines, and they were all in the sort of Southeast Asia region. So yeah.
Makes sense. Man.
Okay, thanks guys. Yeah.
You still sound very far away from your mic, Rich.
Really? Let me.
Yeah.
Do me a favor. Does this sound any better?
Oh, much better.
Much better. This is really strange. It must be my controller. I don't know what happened. Because it's on. I have two microphones. Like I have a desktop microphone. So like when I do long calls like this, I just get tired of this thing being on my head. And so I just have a desktop microphone here. And
it sounded like it switched to your headset microphone, which was just lying on your table.
Right. Yeah. That's why I came over here and I kind of switched it back and forth.
Yeah. Okay.
Because right now it says I am on the second one, which should be my desktop microphone. So it's still sounding okay now?
Anyway, that's good. Yeah. That's good. That's great.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. All right. Well, strange. I'll just finish out the call here on this, and I'll probably have to reboot my controller over there. Anyway, getting back to the Q&A, let's see here. Leif asked, what's your take on the travel we've made from DA to IPv6 to always on with more down-to-earth IPv4 once again? So good question. So here's my take on that. I love IPv6. I do a lot of work with IPv6. Direct access was one of the first workloads from Microsoft that required IPv6. And at the end of the day, IPv6 is a fantastic transport, but IPv6 enterprise adoption has been slow. So in order to make direct access work, we had to introduce transition and translation technologies that really complicated things. And so that's where direct access gets really heavy, is because you have multiple layers of encapsulation, encryption, and transition and translation. We have to translate IPv6 to IPv4 addresses and so forth. So we have DNS name translation, we have NAT translation, and that's where direct access got heavy. So and so there was real problems with that. So getting back to always on VPN and using IPv4 only is great for those organizations who never adopted IPv6, and a lot of them won't because they have plenty of address space. Now, we could go down a rabbit hole with my thoughts on that, because I think there are compelling reasons to migrate to IPv6 outside of just the massive address space. There are many operational advantages to using IPv6 over IPv4. It is a modern protocol. IPv4 is a legacy protocol. But the reality is that it is not as widely deployed on the enterprise, on private networks, like it is on the internet. On the internet, it's fantastic. It's making great headway there. There's lots of adoption. I think we're well over 50% on the public internet. And the important thing to remember is that with IPv6, there are a lot of we are flat out of IPv4 space on the internet. There is no more public IPv4 address space. So there are a lot of especially in emerging territories and emerging countries, where when they spin up a new ISP there, they don't have IPv4, right? So they have to do IPv6 and some sort of IPv4 translation. So IPv6 would be optimal in those regions. But again, if you're not using it internally, then it causes those incompatibilities and challenges and issues that you've faced. So for me, I think Always On VPN, first of all, Always On VPN supports IPv6. I run IPv6 for some of my customers. I run it certainly in my test lab just to be cognizant of how things might affect IPv6. For example, if you're implementing traffic filters, correct me if I'm wrong, Philip, IPv6 breaks traffic filters in Always On VPN. I haven't tested those in ages, but that was a problem in the past. So there's some limitations there that certainly for by implementing IPv6 with Always On VPN.
Thanks, Richard.
Yeah,
it's funny.
I think
the IPv6 trip was some real brain exercise. Something new about subnet masks. I really love that.
Yeah. Well, in an IPv6, you don't have to worry about subnet masks. Everything's a /64. So the standard subnet is /64, no more, no less, right? And
is it the 59
we get out of having to worry about you get out of having to worry about subnet size. There's no more scarcity anymore, so you can just assign a /64 to everybody and call it a day. So all we have to do really is worry about the number of networks we need and to make sure we have an allocation large enough to support that. But in terms of subnets, what is a 64 is like 18 quintillion IP addresses per subnet. Yeah. So we get out of that business of having to worry about having enough address space in a particular subnet anymore. So that's nice.
It's like more than sand grains in the universe, but as a matter of fact,
it's incredible, and that's just in a standard IPv6 subnet /64, and so exactly. It's incredible. But yeah,
but I did my IPv6 training when I did the direct access cluster behind the NetScaler, because that was the /59. You might remember.
So yeah, that was a decision that Microsoft made to use a /59 for when you set up a cluster, because each entry point needs to have its own IPv6 prefix. They chose a /59, which is an unusual setting, and I think it's because this was in the early days of direct access. The recommendation today is to subnet along what's known as nibble boundaries. So /59 does not fall evenly on one of those characters in IPv6. So when we say on nibble boundaries, we want to say it's 2001:DB8 :2112:5 and we don't want to do it because it's hex, and you don't want to do it in the middle of 1 through F. You want to just make sure that we just cut along those lines, and so 59 is not clean. So what we want to do is if you do it along nibble boundaries, it'll be 64 as the standard prefix, but then subnetting that would be /60 or 56 or 52 or 48. And if you follow that, it's basically just one character in to the left in the match, and so you don't have to do any math to go, oh no, this goes through A4, but A5 is the next subnet, and it's like, well, that would be really tough. I just need to know, hey, if we get past A, then the next octet, or not octet, the next nibble would be the subnet. So yeah, but at the end of the day, here's the thing with direct access. You don't even have to know how to spell IPv6 for it to work. So you don't have to do any of those things. You don't have to set up the transition technologies. You don't have to do the subnetting, right? You don't have to get an allocation. It's all using unique local addressing, or EULA. And so it takes all that out of your hands. Now, when direct access doesn't work, sometimes you got to know these things. So I always tell people, you don't have to have any IPv6 knowledge to implement it, but you kind of do to support it, because you really got to understand those things.
We did some static IPv6 reverse route from management servers, and also in the RDS and Citrix form. Is that well known?
Yeah, I've heard of people doing that for outbound management.
Yeah. Outbound management.
Yeah, got this native v6 manage out, I think we call this.
Yep.
Yeah, it did work.
And if you wanna do the master class, do this behind a load balanced Teredo server.
All right.
Because Teredo in that implementation is using the same prefix for all DA servers.
Yeah.
Right? As
Yeah.
well, with IPHTTPS, you had like a 1, 2, 3, 4 and unique
Yeah.
identifier per
Exactly.
per DA server. But for Teredo, it's just a 2001 or 2001 prefix. So you had to do fun things, like you had to have an load balancer on the outside and on the inside, and they had to talk to each other in order to maintain the session. An absolute
So that's when
nightmare
you're
to set up.
terminating the SSL, I guess.
But Teredo again is UDP, so it's not SSL based, so you can't do that. So you had to make the load balancers talk to each other, and I remember a specific customer had to set this up, and it didn't work no matter what we did.
No.
Yeah.
We didn't use
I think at some
Teredo,
point we
but
just gave up. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's for another talk. Just miscellaneous that the /59 is that's 32 64 subnets. So they actually made it possible to have a cluster of 32 servers, I guess.
That's the reason. Because 32 is the cluster limitation, and the closest one is 59 5 bits.
Yeah,
exactly.
Makes sense.
Well, that was
I knew there was a decision. There was a design decision to use a 59. I'm sure. So
yeah. And my brain.
Again, it's now almost 20 years later. So we might did something. Nowadays, we might do something different. Yeah.
So I'm actually pretty good friends with one of the former PMs, a gentleman by the name of Scott Roberts, who runs who was at the time the PM for Direct Access in Server 2012 when they were basically rewriting it entirely. And I asked him about that specifically. He didn't have an answer for me. I'm like, why are you using a 59? Why wouldn't you use just a 56? Because that's kind of along those nibble boundaries. But he didn't know. He said it was just some technical limitation or whatever. But I just think it was a design decision to say, hey, I honestly think it was. So one of the things with IPv6 is there is this challenge that we face where many administrators bring IPv4 think over to IPv6. The massive address space in IPv6 really forces you to think differently. There is no scarcity of addresses. And so, for example, we will use a /64 on a point-to-point link. There's 2 IP addresses, and people will say, oh, you're wasting all these addresses. Who cares? You can't waste enough of them, right? Because I think somebody did the math once, and they said if you had a DHCP server and you were doling out 10 million addresses per second, how long would it take you to exhaust a single /64 prefix? And the math was like 58,000 years. So it's like, it's something, the address space, that's just for a single prefix. By the way, my ISP gives me a /56. So we don't have a problem with address scarcity anymore, right? So you got to get out of that thinking. So I think what they looked at is and said, we need a /59 because that's like, the bare minimum, right? They should have just said, we need at least a 59, so let's just go to 56 and call it. But I think their engineers were probably thinking, that's wasting the address space. So the answer is you really can't waste it. It's impossible, right?
Fast forward 100 years,
anyway,
someone will look at this.
For sure.
Richie mentioned someone was looking into this in 100 years, and they will say, "Oh, what did these guys say there back then?" No, I'm kidding. No.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Richie.
Yeah, my pleasure, man. Great to hear from you. So Brian asked. Brian mentions. So Brian says he's got Cisco VPN. User-based certificates. Is there any known issue with deploying the setup via Intune? And to complicate things, it's hybrid join. So we plan on installing the VPN client and certificate during autopilot. Microsoft Docs listed unsupported for user-based certificates. I don't know if this is a user-based issue or has it changed. So here's the thing. When you are deploying certificates with Intune and your user-based certificates, during autopilot, so I'm not an autopilot expert here, but during autopilot, you're working in the machine context. We can get machine certificates down during that process. That's great. And if it's hybrid join, we don't know who the user is until they log on. So we're setting up the machine, we're doing the domain join through the Intune domain connector and those types of things. And so we can't issue user certificates during the autopilot process because we don't know who the user is at that point. We have to wait for them to log on. So, if there's an option to do some sort of device-based authentication, absolutely, you could issue the certificates with Intune. And by the way, we do that today with Always On VPN. We can deploy the device tunnel profile and the device certificate along with the root and any certificates in the chain during the autopilot process, so that during a remote hybrid intra-ID join with autopilot, once the process is complete, the user is presented a logon prompt, but the device tunnel is up, so they have domain connectivity, and they can authenticate against the domain controller to process that first logon because it has no cache credentials. In fact, doesn't even have a profile. So in that scenario, we can support that. I don't know if that helps you with your Cisco-based. I know Cisco has machine-based connectivity. They have something called SBL, or Start Before Logon. I don't know if you're using that today, or if you're just using pure user-based. In that case, you have to wait for the user to log on in order to get that certificate. Does that help you, Ryan? If you're on still. By the way, I don't know if he has his hand raised. Martin, if you're still on the call, I saw you had your hand raised earlier, my friend. I'm sorry I missed you. I was going to try to get to you. Do you still have a question, Martin?
No, actually, it's not a question. It's more like Always On VPN. Direct access actually solves this HTTPS traffic. We have users in China and they connect to Vienna to be able to Google something yep. like that. So that helps. Maybe yes. If you use IPv6 instead of IPv4, you can circumvent that.
Entirely possible. I'm not sure. So I have customers that have locations in China, and we've had to do some unusual things to get traffic out. I'll share with you, I won't share the company name, but I'll share with you how we worked around this. And what we did is we had a couple of websites that we needed to get out from China. And so what we ended up doing is using I call selective tunneling. And so what we did is we implemented a proxy server, and we implemented on the client a proxy auto configuration file that would look at a specific domain and then tunnel that over the VPN tunnel to a proxy server outside of China. So in that case, they would type into their browser, like, for example, Facebook is not allowed or whatever, facebook.com, the PAC file would recognize that, send it over the VPN tunnel to a proxy server in another country. I forget where it was, Singapore, Australia, someplace close. And then from there, we could get out to the internet, and so then it would work. So you may need to get creative when you think of ways to try to get some of that traffic out. By the way, Martin, are you still with United Nations?
Yes.
Okay. So so I've had to solve this for other UN agencies. And the way we have done this is, again, just that way. We take some traffic because as some agencies have a pretty large deployment footprint, and so they are in a lot of countries where there's heavy traffic filtering, and so we don't want to do full tunneling, but in the cases where we need to get specific traffic out, we'll do that. We'll just bring it over the tunnel. So third-party solutions are a lot better at that. Things like Absolute Secure Access, or NetMotion Mobility formerly, are really good at that. I can just literally just tell it which domain I want to route over the tunnel. And Always On VPN has more problems with that. You really have to do a kind of a proxy scenario in that situation.
Yeah.
Right.
Just to kind of point out as well that there are some very strict security laws in China and other locations like that may or may not make that illegal. So you will probably want to talk to or run that stuff past your legal and compliance teams before you go and actually implement that live.
No question. Yeah. And by the way, the advice that I just gave you is as is, no warranties impressed or expressed or implied.
Of course.
We state my liability claim there.
Yeah, I just wrote about the same solution for our offices in Shanghai and in Hong Kong as well. We have MPLS connections from China to Europe, so we are doing some workarounds.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. We do some workarounds. We even did workarounds back in the Microsoft TMG server as a proxy. Yeah.
Good
So the
TMG,
users in China hit our TMG, and that rerouted as a reverse proxy over the MPLS.
Yeah. Very good. Yeah. TMG. TMG is a good one. That might even been before your time, Philip.
Oh no, I actually had to support ISA.
Oh, really? Okay. So back to ISA server. Good deal.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I migrate from ISA to TMG.
Yeah. Same here.
Yeah,
I spent a lot of time with those products.
To Richard's example, it's all about routing legitimate business traffic that has valid business needs, not social media.
You bet.
So, and they happily have all the licenses required to do that for business reasons. So again, it's very selective to our interest is always in like moving that business traffic. So.
Very good. Yeah, not trying to break any or circumvent any laws or restrictions there.
No, that's actually the important. Again, like a full tunnel can provide some things, but again, you actually want to be careful we don't send anything we don't need down there. Like it's really just about getting access to the corporate apps. So.
Right.
And I heard from another customer there is apparently a difference if you use China Telecom versus China Telecom Global, because one of them is sort of able to route traffic more easily outside the country, but you would need some legal work.
There's like it's so I mean, the peering in country is very poor. So like we use China Telecom tends to be the best. And then they have different tiers. We actually tried to use their like second tier of internet. It was actually worse than the first one. And then we found out there's like a premium one above the second one that is actually the better one. So it all became kind of like the private lines are better than fighting with all of that. So
interesting. Most interesting. Fun stuff. Always interesting when you have to deal with those types of challenges.
If they didn't just block it would be so easy if like we could, because between Azure China that you can use the global, like we can essentially use Azure Global the load balancer. Like we can actually make Azure China part of it. That part's so slick. It just if we could use the same name, it would be really easy.
Yep. Very good. Yeah. Right on. Moving on to the next question. Sjord, hopefully I pronounced your name correctly there. What would be the best way to make sure that DNS servers coming from the VPN get prioritized at all times? Says we now use a convoluted script using Task Manager, just simply not foolproof. So this is probably related to IPv4 and IPv6 interface metrics. So the challenge with a VPN, when you have a VPN connected, is your client is now what's known as multi-homed, right? So you actually have multiple active internet connections or active network connections. You have your connection that you use to get to the internet, whether that was a wired Ethernet connection or whether that was a Wi-Fi connection or even a WWAN, like an LTE connection. That's your connection to the internet. When the VPN tunnel comes up, it is also an active network interface. And so those interfaces have different priorities in Windows, okay? So they are prioritized by default automatically based on their network speed, okay? And so they have priorities there. The way DNS works is that when there's a DNS query, and I forget when this changed. I think it changed back in the Windows Vista timeframe. But anyway, the way DNS works is that when there's a DNS query, it is sent to the first DNS server listed on all active interfaces. So that would mean Wi-Fi and your VPN adapter, right? So the query goes out both of those. If it only gets one return response, then it uses that. That's really easy. That's an easy scenario. So if I ask for a private name and it goes over both tunnels, I'm probably only going to get that back from my on-premises DNS servers because the public DNS servers don't know about that. And most of the time that works okay. When it doesn't is if the public DNS server returns a record like an NX domain record and gives you an IP address back, because a lot of times ISPs will want to give you, like, if you type in the wrong thing in your address bar, they want to give you their home screen or some help pages or something like that, right? Oh, advertising most of the time. Anyway, so there can be problems with that. So the way we tailor the DNS responses, and again, by the way, if there's two responses that come back, the network interface with the lowest or the highest priority, which is the lowest interface metric, is preferred. So if I send the DNS query out over the Wi-Fi adapter and the tunnel adapter, and they come back, a lot of times those interface metrics are the same, and so it will have to choose some other way to identify that. Where we commonly see the problem is if somebody plugs a network cable, like an Ethernet cable connection, they're connected into a router or switch, or their modem, their cable modem, or something like that. Those interfaces have a much lower metric because they're a lot faster than a Wi-Fi typically, right? And so in that scenario, you'll find that a wired network interface has a much lower interface than our VPN adapter, and that can kind of upset the apple cart, as it were. And so in that scenario, we commonly will reduce the value of the interface metric on our VPN adapters to be equal or lower than that of what we'd expect the lowest interface to be, which is usually an Ethernet adapter, which is like either set to 5 or 25. I forget what it is. I usually set them by default to something really low, like 3, and that way I know that they are always preferred when they are active. So, but I have run into a few corner cases where we've actually had to change it to reverse that, to set it higher. Had a weird problem with a customer recently where Duo authentication was timing out when they were trying to log on, and it ended up being that some of the traffic was trying to go over the device tunnel but wasn't reachable. It had to actually go over to the internet. So we had to deprioritize that. So depending on how you're doing that, that is a way to tailor DNS responses using interface metrics. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, well, thanks for answering the question. Thanks for the session, by the way. But what we're trying to do is you working with the Azure private endpoints. So if with storage accounts, so if you would resolve a storage account, in the scenario where you have a Wi-Fi connection and a VPN connection, and the Wi-Fi would, in this case, the Wi-Fi constantly has the highest priority. It would return the public IP address of that public endpoint in Azure, and when you use the lookup through the internal domain controller, then obviously, because that is allowed to return the private IP, it will return the correct IP address. But then I have to make sure that the clients lookups go through the internal provided DNS. And the metric is indeed what I know also from your blog posts, the solution here. But now we've come up with a task scheduler script that just changes the metric every 5 or 3 minutes or whatever. But you can imagine that sometimes we have scenarios where customers, they run around with a laptop and change their network interfaces. Somehow they have a dongle with 4G or whatever. Then the order changes, and then I have to tell them, just wait 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and then it works or something like that. But isn't there some other foolproof setup somehow within Intune or whatever that you guys have come up with in the past?
So let me ask you this: how are you implementing the change? Are you implementing it using PowerShell and SetNet IP interface, or are you updating the entry settings in the rasphone.pbk file?
Well, maybe the latter is the solution here, but indeed it is PowerShell. So I'm now doing the command SetNet IP interface something.
Yeah, so unfortunately,
Profile.
the PowerShell command set net IP interface, and you can change the interface metric there. That
Mhm.
is temporary, so that is not persistent. So yeah, that PowerShell command works, and it's helpful for in like initial testing just to validate that this setting will work for you. But that's not a persistent setting. So the way to fix that would be to update the INI. Well, it's an INI file, but it's a .ppk as the extension to this file. But it's in an INI format where it's attribute value. There is an attribute called interface metric or IPv4 interface metric, and it's usually set to 0, which is automatic. But if you set that to a numerical value like 3 or 5 or 20 or whatever you choose, then that will persist for that VPN. Every time it starts, it will be at that interface metric. And if you're using Windows 11 24H2, as I'd mentioned at the outset of our session today, the CSP actually supports setting the interface metrics in the XML. So again, if you're using Windows 11 24 and H2 and later, you can set the interface metrics in XML. So as soon as you deploy the profile, it will have the correct interface metric settings that you want.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's cool. I mean, currently we're using the Intune way of configuring the VPN, so not with the XML. But yeah,
okay. If you're using Intune native, then you would have to use a remediation script, which runs
that's
deployment.
The point. In this particular case, we have a customer that doesn't have the enterprise license, so we're not able to use the remediation script.
Oh, really?
So that's
okay. Okay,
so the other.
That's kind of a bummer.
But what now? I mean, with the new version of Windows, that would help indeed. But what you're saying about the phone book change, that was also very helpful, I guess. So I think I'm gonna look into that.
Yeah, the other alternative would be to just use DPC, because DPC has that capability built in as well. It's just a checkbox. You just say, I want to update this setting, and then you'd set the value in there. And you can use Intune, and you could use DPC with Intune if you like as well. So that would help too.
Yeah, I was very interested in hearing about that. So I've written it down. So probably
have a look at it.
Deep dive
have a look at it. It'll make your life infinitely easier. Trust me.
The other thing that might be useful, if you know the names of the storage accounts and things that you're connecting to, you might be able to use domain name information to mess with the NRPT table, which I think would override the default configurations anyway.
Yeah, experience with the NRPT as well, and that is indeed something that's natively configurable in Intune, but somehow it just simply won't work. I'm not getting expected results.
Not all components on the Windows OS honor it, unfortunately. So also some browsers don't.
Yes,
so that's
absolutely.
why I think there's quite a group of non-NRPT fans in this audience, and I'm one of them.
Yeah,
I try to avoid using NRPT and specifically domain name information, because oftentimes it causes more problems than it solves. So I've had a couple of corner cases where we had to resort to using it, but I try to avoid it as much as possible, because again, you get a lot of unexpected results, and it often yields more, like I said, more challenges than it causes. You're right there. If somebody just tries to go to an IPv4 address, that's it. You're out. It avoids that. And then you have applications that are not NRPT aware. I have found that it causes problems for support, because then support doesn't know what the NRPT is or how it works, and so they're pinging something and expecting a certain result, or doing NSLOOKUP and expecting and getting something back different. It confuses the heck out of them, right? So. Even worse than that is probably DNS policies. We could go down that rabbit hole. I've had to use those before, but that is a support nightmare for sure. But there's some ways you could probably try to solve that for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Well, at least I got a lot of several ideas to solve this problem. So let me dive into this a little bit further. Thanks, guys. For helping.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for joining us. Looks like I have some new posts here. Let me see here. So let's see here. Leo has a question. Has there been any updates or resolutions to the issue causing the error message? Port is already open. I'm going to throw that one to Philip.
I need to leave. I need to leave. Oh God!
Thank you for your question, Leo.
This is being recorded,
Just sticking the knife right in
Yes,
there.
this is being recorded. If we need to have a separate offline call, we can talk.
No, well, I believe it's a day zero issue. The challenge is it's super hard to capture. I finally thought I have a customer. We have a script called TSS, which is running all the collections, the data collections. And guess what? Whenever the script runs, the problem does not repro.
So this is basically a quantum issue here, right? So the act of observing has changed the environment.
And I'm not kidding. This other customer mentioned, oh, fine, we just run TSS all the time. I said, no, please don't do that.
Oh, but, not a good idea.
They have a scenario which is related to apparently when the machine is on battery and they return it from sleep or hibernate, then it's it's a higher likelihood that it might happen. It's not happening all the time. But literally whenever they run TSS, it doesn't. So we need to find another way to capture data, but then it's not enough. And to be fair, this is a problem we're having since day one. It's really hard to catch.
Wow.
It usually, when you see this, it usually means something else went wrong before, like a lot of reconnects or
so it's like
timeouts or exactly. Yeah. At some point, I think Grassman is just fed up and says, well, leave me alone. Yeah. And that's also the solution, right? If you restart or force restart Grassman, force restart as in kill, because it's a protected service now, it works because essentially some heap memory gets, the problem is that there's an internal port status, and the internal port status says the connection is still open, although it's closed, and hence the connection port already open, or hence the error message port already open.
The error message.
Because the service thinks it's already open, but it's not. So it wasn't tiered down, and we're still trying to find it's years now, to be fair, trying to find why and when, because it in my lab environment, I even built a physical lab. I can't, no matter what I do, I can't repro it.
Yeah. So the reason why I mention it is there's someone in Discord that seems to have a quite high hit rate on that. I don't know whether it's the same customer that you're dealing with already, but I thought I'd mention it in case.
Send it my way.
People.
Send it my way if you can.
Leo, we should. Just
I think I did tag you if you're the Philip in.
I need
Discord.
to start.
Philip, are you on our Discord channel?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay, good.
But to be fair, I don't look so often into it, so I should probably do that.
A user called Cranky, maybe.
Cranky.
Okay.
Yeah. But I did tag you in it just in case.
Okay.
That you would find interest in having another customer.
Very good.
It seems to be hitting it relatively regularly, like they've had it several times in a week, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's usually an indicator that something else is a bit unstable. So I had a customer. It's actually you were on site with this customer as well, Richard. You might remember.
Yes.
So they had some weird issues because they were using VPN anytime, so also internally when they were in their internal network.
Right, yeah.
So and they had some load balancing problems, and that's essentially if they hit a number of retries or retries of the VPN connection, it might end up in exactly that scenario port already open, because I think it just got lost.
Yeah.
And they found sort of a way with a very extensive disconnect reconnect script to repro it, but that's not really a real life scenario, right? Because normally that doesn't happen. So you can probably break it, but it might not break the same way as it would when you just see it. So but it's generally an indicator that something isn't quite right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think I've only seen it one time ever in my life, but I hear a lot of reports that it happens, right? And Leo, to his credit, has developed some logic in in DPC to help work around that by just restarting Razman, which works sometimes not, but it helps, right? So
it normally, if you fully kill the service, the heap is cleared, and it usually works.
Yeah. That's interesting, but that makes sense. Let's see here. Is there any documentation for DPC? Yeah, Leo hit it. The Power On videos and in the videos that I have done on my website. If you go to youtube.com/Richard Hicks, I think that's my YouTube channel. If you go to my website, there's a YouTube link there. I've done a bunch of YouTube videos. I know there are a bunch of other Power On YouTube videos. By the way, Leo, they obviously their website's gone, right? Or is it? Or did they leave their YouTube stuff up?
I don't think the administrators have got to the YouTube channel yet. So
got it. Okay. Well, if the Power On YouTube channel is still up, then there's great stuff there. If not, you can bounce over to my YouTube channel, and I've done a number of different demonstration videos for DPC. Again, it's for the commercial version, but principally it's still the same software. It's just modified slightly to support open source, but technically it would be very similar. So you could use those as a reference as well, Brian.
Yeah. Only difference is just ignore anything that talks about product keys.
Exactly. Yeah. No product keys anymore, right? But the rest of it should be pretty good. There weren't any functional changes in 5, were there? Did we add any features and functionality?
Yeah, the only one I took the advantage of it being a kind of a break and change release to remove the option around VPN monitoring because it was becoming, in the very early days, it was kind of like didn't know whether people would find it useful or if there would be a performance impact. But over the years, it became kind of increasingly important that we were monitoring the status of VPN tunnels. So I then had someone who hadn't got it enabled and just took the opportunity to just kind of turn it on or force it on effectively in V5.
Good deal. Good to know. Awesome. So I think that we're coming up at the end of the hour here, and I think this is a good breaking point because it looks like there aren't any other questions. Did I miss anybody?
I think there's one from Peter that was missed.
Oh, yes. Yeah, thanks for calling that one out. Sorry about that. Looks like Peter had to leave. But, well, we'll tell you what, we'll answer it, and then it'll be on the recording for Peter when he comes, if he wants to listen to it. So anyway, so these are all on-premises servers. Someone in my organization let the CA certificate expire in AD. Shame on them. Anyway, I
Maybe
have
they
since
should come to
updated
your
the Always On
masterclass.
VPN RAS and NPS servers, as well as client. However, when I tried connecting, getting a certificate could not be found for EAP 24H2 client server 2022. Certificate can't be found just simply means pretty obvious, right? It couldn't find a certificate. For why, I don't know. So if you've reissued that certificate, renewed your CA certificate, obviously you need to, if this is an offline route, you have to publish that in Active Directory. If it's an online route, it should be published in AD automatically. But I've seen issues where it's also possible that if you're pushing the root certificate out with group policy, that there can be some conflicts there. Perhaps the server, you don't indicate that the server was domain joined. If it wasn't domain joined, you'd have to bring that root certificate over. If you've not renewed, by the way, when your CA certificate expires, that would naturally mean that any certificate issued by that CA would be expired, because a certificate server cannot issue a certificate for any longer than its certificate is valid. So right up to the point that it expired, for example, the day before it expired, if you issue a certificate that had a, quote, 1-year validity period, it would be issued with a 1-day validity period because it would only be able to issue it up to the point that its certificate expired. So it's possible that the certificate on the VPN server expired. There's a lot of things you would have to look at, but ultimately, make sure that the certificates are all valid, make sure that they're trusted, that the chains are valid as well. and everything should work at that point. I wouldn't expect any other issues on that.
Is that the hashes have probably changed, so you need to make sure your profile configuration has the latest root and issuing certificate hashes.
Good point. Yeah. So the certificate is functionally a new certificate, right? Because it's a new thumbprint. It's a new certificate. So if you're doing certificate filtering on the VPN client profile, that would need to be updated as well. Good point.
And I guess if there's a custom IKE policy, sorry, Leo, go ahead.
There's an edge case, isn't there, Rich, where if you have cache credentials, I want to say the command is, that sometimes when you're reissuing the issuing authority, that can cause some issues as well, but that's more of an edge case.
I agree. Yeah, there were some problems in the early days of Always On VPN. I do remember that, where if you enabled credential caching, but you were using certificates for authentication, when the user renewed their certificate, it would be problematic. But I thought those were solved. I thought those were fixed. I don't know for sure.
I remember this one a few years ago that got fixed. Yeah,
it was quite a while ago. I thought it had been fixed, but I still recommend, if you're using certificates, don't enable credential caching because you kind of don't need it. So, but you're right. Yeah.
And what about if it's an IKE connection, an IKE custom policy? Right, so this certificate might change from something like RSA to EC or so.
Yeah.
Because that wouldn't match then, right? If you say in the policy, I want to see an RSA something and it's suddenly an EC or vice versa.
Yeah, custom policy would be good to look at to make sure that there's no issues there, right? So you issued an EC certificate now, and before it was set up to RSA, and so you're using DH14, which is RSA 2048-bit, right? Certainly that's a possibility. The other thing you bring up, and excellent point, Philip, is that if you've enforced CA restrictions using the set VPN auth protocol, there's a value called root certificate name to accept, and that is by thumbprint. And typically when you renew the CA certificate, Windows just kind of uses the new certificate and will update itself. But it's possible that maybe that certificate didn't get updated, or somehow that didn't get missed, or that got missed, and so you may have some problems there. So there's another thing to look at. Run the command get-VPN auth protocol. If you have a value set for root certificate name to accept, make sure that thumbprint matches the thumbprint of your newly issued root CA certificate.
Oh, I have a quick story you might like, Richard.
Okay.
A customer had a problem. With their CA. They just set up the CA from Greenfield, named it exactly the same, and then said, "Oh, it's not working," right? Because obviously all the thumbprints are different now, and it was quite challenging to find, right? Because you look at it and says, "Oh no, that actually matches," right? But you see in the logs it says untrusted root CA, and why did? Yeah, and at some point we started comparing thumbprints, and then it's like, why is this a different thumbprint? And then someone came up and said, oh these guys they reissued, or they reinstalled the CA server. I said, oh wow, okay.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. And again, there's a lot of times. So for example, if you're setting up a CA, and there are some settings that when you make those changes, you actually need to reissue a CA certificate, the CA signing certificate. And so I have seen, I was working with a customer just 2 weeks ago, had the same thing. They were on certificate number 5 or 6. And so when you look at the CA certificates, the CA signing certificates, now typically you'll see 1 or 2, like they've renewed the certificate over time. Maybe they set it up and it had a short lifetime, like only 5 years. And so they've renewed it once or twice. This was a pretty new CA, and they were all valid. And I said, what happened? Well, what happened is they kept making mistakes, and then they would fix their problems, and then they have to reissue a new CA signing certificate rather than uninstall and reinstall. That's what they were doing. So, but again, those are all valid certificates, but they all have different thumbprints. They are all unique. And so that can cause problems as well. So yeah, the certificate chaining engine on the client can sort those things out sometimes, but not always.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good times. Very good, very good, very good. I think we've got to everything. I don't see any other questions in the chat. I'll open it up. Anybody else have any questions that were not in the chat or the QA that want to bring that up now? Otherwise, we can kind of wrap things up if you like. I'm going to take that.
Yeah. It is 9 p.m. here in Sweden, so we're we're good.
Very good. Yeah, thanks for joining us, Leif. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It's been great.
Yeah, we got folks from all over the place. We got folks from UK, Switzerland. You're from Sweden. I'm from the United States. I know Damian was on earlier. I don't know if he's still on now. He was from Spain. We got good coverage here. So, Damian's still here. How's it going, Damian? Yeah, and great to hear from everybody. Martin, I forget where Martin's from. He's from somewhere over there in Europe, right? Anyway, yeah, good times. Awesome. Well, I think we'll kind of wrap it up. Here's very good. So I want to just leave everybody with my contact information. I'm all over the internet, so you probably found me somewhere, but you can find them here. The best way, I always just wrap this up by saying, if you just go to richardhicks.com/connect, that takes you to a reference to a link page to all of my social media stuff. But I'm all over the place. But my social media platform of choice is I call it Twitter. It's X now, but I like to still call it Twitter. That's where you'll find me most of the time. I'm usually mixing it up there, but I have all the other ones as well. By the way, my YouTube is Richard M. Hicks. I said that was Richard Hicks earlier, so it is Richard M. Hicks. So what that means is that somebody got my name before I got there. I'm usually pretty good about getting stuff. I own richardhicks.com. That's the one that was really important to me. But that's because as you can see by the disappearing hairline here, I am of advanced age. And so I was on the internet at a time when there was no UI. That's how old I am. So there was no graphical user interface for the internet when I got on. So I've had my name forever for that regard. But a couple of the other ones that I got too late, like that one, obviously I had to make an adjustment and put my middle initial in there. So, but anyway, I think it's like with everybody.
I think it's like in the movie Taken. We will find you.
Absolutely. Philip, Leo, thank you again, as always, for joining me. I appreciate you helping out on this, and your insight is always valuable. So thanks again for joining me. And thanks everybody else for any other questions at all, just drop me a note. I will post this video on YouTube at some point. I have to go clean it up and edit it, obviously, but I'll get that posted to the YouTube channel. So if you missed something, you can go back and watch that, and we'll go from there. But anyway, thanks everybody for your time. I'm going to go grab it's lunchtime here in the U.S., and I'm in the west coast of U.S., Los Angeles area. So it's time for me to have lunch. And but anyway, great talking with everybody. I appreciate it. Have a good day.
Cheers so much.
Bye.
Cheers, everybody.
Catch you later.
Bye-bye.
Take care. See you.